All right, here we go. I want to welcome everybody to this historic event presented by the Captiva Island Historical Society. My name is Mike Boris. I'm a member of the board, and the rest of my board members are here, most of them. They're all worker bees doing things, been doing things all along. And I want to thank you all for being here. So thank you. We have been trying to do this kind of an event for a long time. From many different directions, people have always wanted to do something with the Historical Society. And, logistics is a major issue. So finally, we've got something off the ground, and we're calling it the Captiva Historic Cemetery Past, Present, and Future. In fact, it's really the far past, the near past, and the present. Yeah, okay. Queenie wrote a script for us. How's that? Mary Jane's coaching me. All right. That we are going to share. This mic is tough for me. We're going to share with you the past is. I'm not sure what character she is, but Christy Anders is going to kick us off, and then myself reading the script. Hopefully, some of us have memorized, some of us haven't, and then Nathalie Pyle will finish up. It's a relatively brief program. We think we're going to fill it in with a lot of Q&A and maybe some storytelling at the end. So here we go. Welcome, everybody. Before I forget, I'll be in real trouble if I don't also acknowledge Sandcap Trust, who has been sponsoring us this season and many in the past, and we thank them for this event and the future events. I'll close with some reminders on what's left in the remainder of the season. But for right now, here is Christy Anders, world famous Christy Anders.
Oh, if you know me, you know that me memorizing a script doesn't go together because I'm always off the cuff. So, Queenie, forgive me. Because she worked very hard on this script, and I'm so happy you're here. Hopefully you're interested in the history of the island or the history of cemeteries, and so we're all gathered together. But what I want to do first is kind of get you to picture this island before there was a cemetery here. Because some of the things we kind of take for granted, that the beach is the beach. When in fact, the maps from the 100 years ago, 200, 300 years ago, paint an entirely different picture for these islands. A map in 1757 by Francisco Celli. He was a Spaniard who wrote down Boca del Captivo. Now, notice that there's an O at the end. That means that it's the male form. So all those who think that a dastardly pirate stashed his women here, sorry, I'm a bubble buster on that one. It's not true. But that Spanish map showed Boca Seca, which is Blind Pass, and Boca de Captivo. And then in 1775, Bernard Robins, who was an English cartographer, he had another map that showed this island contiguous from the very tip of North Captiva Island all the way down in front of Sanibel. At one point in time, Captiva stretched all the way to Bowman's Beach. So if you can picture that, right? You've got that long, restless ribbon of sand, but you also have an island that's almost twice as wide as it is right now. We spend millions of dollars every 5 years or so to pump sand up on the beach so we have a place to walk. But in fact, this knoll, this little hill, who puts a cemetery on the beach, right? No, that's because this was a hill, there was a valley, and there was another hill. And then there was the beach, because the homesteaders grew sugarcane in between the two hills. All that's gone now. And one of the people that tried to farm here was William Binder. Now, Binder moved here in the 1890s, and he got his permit to actually homestead these lands back in 1895, 96. Bear with me. All right. Sorry, Queenie. But if you can imagine the island, that dynamic, you know. And then when you talk about the water here, fish so thick that you could walk on them. There were Cuban fisheries coming and going all the time, but back in the 1870s, the United States government sent an ichthyologist, a biologist, to study the fishes in this area. And he found a permanent settlement at the north end of what we now call North Captiva, but was then Captiva. And they produced 660,000 pounds of dried mullet in a single season, and almost 50,000 pounds of dried roe, if you can imagine. Now, his crew came from the Florida Keys and from the Bahamas and other places around the country. He wasn't one of those temporary Cuban fisheries that came and went. But just a remarkable place. I can't imagine the fish that were here at that time. And as thick as the fish were, the mosquitoes were just as bad. You know, you had to kind of scrape them away to look out the screen if you were lucky enough to have a screen to get through. You know, people always wondered why there weren't cattle on this island. They couldn't breathe. Mosquitoes would get so thick in the nostrils of the cattle that they couldn't breathe, so they never bothered bringing cattle to this island. So, in those days that we gathered here, we know that Binder owned this land, and he befriended a family that lived on Buckeye by the name of Brainerd. And a little girl, her name was Ann, she would come over and she'd sit, because this was the higher of the two hills, she'd sit here to watch the water. And she told William Binder that this was the prettiest place she had ever seen. And he made a deal with Anne to buy a little piece of land that she could come and sit on with a gold coin that she had been given by her grandparents before they left Canada. Tragically, just after Anne bought her little plot of land, she stepped on a rusty nail. She died of tetanus. And she is the first, as far as we can tell, the first one that was buried in this cemetery. Signs say something different, but the Brainards had 10 children. 6 of them are buried here on this piece of land. Now, Hattie Brainerd lost her husband, eventually married Alvin Gore, and actually her headstone sits between Alvin Gore and Brainerd's gravestone. But that's the family plot about in the middle. Annie's little gravestone has a lamb on top of it. You'll be able to spot it pretty easily. There are other people that were buried here in the early parts of the century. Among them, William Binder was buried on the Brainerd property. Interesting that he sold it to her and then he was buried here. And in the cemetery, you'll find Civil War veterans. You'll find all sorts of folks that were early to these islands. If you drive around these streets and you look at the names of the streets, you'll find those names in the cemetery. They're the place names of the people that lived here. When one of the Confederate soldiers, Henry Knowles, his wife passed away. He's buried in Fort Myers, but she's buried out here. When she passed away, her gravestone said she lived to bless others. And so I say to you, what a blessing it's been that we can be here and that we can share this information with you. And hopefully that gives you a little sketch of what this island looked like before there was a cemetery, but also why on earth there's a cemetery right on the beach. All right. So let me pass this on to the cemetery not quite so old as me.
The near past.
The near past.
Thank you, Christy.
Yep.
So Okay, so now, Mike Boris again. I'm going to speak about some more recent activities here on this hallowed ground. You heard about the Hardy homesteaders and the tragic losses they suffered. Additionally, we had some colorful characters interred here. They continue to be colorful and interred in the future, interred. Clara Strand, first the wife of a local fishing guide, Captain Strand, ran a Captiva Island gift shop and was rumored to be a Hungarian gypsy queen. Now, my heritage is Hungarian, and I don't know of any queens in the gypsies, but they said she was one. People ask, was the extreme wealth of her nobility the reason when local children would come in her shop, Mrs. Strand would allow them to take their purchases at no charge? Probably not. Most likely, it was a gratitude to the community who supported her after her husband's, Captain Strand's, death. Penniless and under the threat of eviction, local men built Clara a house so she would not be booted off the island. At least that's what Captiva Island resident Jean Hayford calls in her audio interview of 1977. It was during the hurricane of 1944 that another Captiva fishing guide died. Captain Smith was a very large man, and Mrs. Hayford recalls in order to accommodate the captain's very large stature, his coffin had to be specially built using whatever wood planks could be found around the island. Because the coffin was put together with in such a rough manner, Mrs. Smith asked that one of her handmade quilts be gently placed in the coffin with her dearly departed husband. But because of Captain Smith's prominent nose, once the quilt was put in place, Captain Smith's fellow fishermen had difficulty closing the coffin lid. Their solution? Wait until Widow Smith was gone back home, then break the nose of their departed friend and swiftly hammer the lid into place. Those are rough times in those days. Those of you in the back, please find a seat. We welcome and we're glad you're here. In this very cemetery, they dug his grave and laid the good captain to rest. I'm sorry, by the way, I'm sorry, Doug. Because of the hurricane, only about 8 Captiva neighbors paid their respects to him on that day. Or at least that's how the story goes. But we do know for a fact our friend Christie did very well to paint the picture of how the land of Captiva Island stretched much further to the west than it currently does today. Time, along with global sea rise and consequential erosion, have completely removed the road previously known over the years as Captiva Boulevard and Gulf Shore Drive, which ran from what we know today as Jensen's on the Gulf north through South Seas Resort. Amazingly, throughout the years, our cemetery has not yet fallen victim to flooding or even erosion, although we did get some sand deposited from Hurricane Ian. We did some work on moving sand here, didn't we, Natalie? Located on the western perimeter of our cemetery, you'll see the seashell-adorned headstone of Allison Hagerup. For 20 years, Allison was the administrator of the Captiva Erosion Prevention District, serving this community by championing the need for refurbishment of our coastline. It's no wonder the public beach access at the Captiva Drive has been dedicated to Allison Hagerup Beach Park. Serving also on the Captiva Erosion Prevention District for 25 years was resort co-owner Dave Jensen. His headstone can be found in the southeast corner of our cemetery, and it suggests Dave is remembered by a lifetime filled with contagious laughter. Dave's parents, Red and Betty Jensen, owned Jensen's Twin Palms Resort, and their headstone is appropriately located in the center of our cemetery at the base of what other than 2 twin palms. Another innkeeper and marina owner, Paul McCarthy, is remembered here as well. Interestingly, Paul's headstone is situated perpendicular to others in the cemetery, reflecting the compass rose directional symbol engraved upon his name, above his name. Paul's headstone is located toward the parsonage on the north side of the cemetery. You know, we view our cemetery as not only a marker of history and a sacred space of remembrance, but we also recognize it as a present, a gift, a place to be cherished and maintained as the treasure that it is. So let's now examine the gift as we look towards its future. Nathalie. This is not a prop. This is part of Nathalie's job.
Well,
Well, it's sort of a prop. But I wanted you to see what actually goes on here, because this is still an active cemetery. We have people who purchased plots some time ago and their families give me a call and say their loved ones have departed. And when they do, this bag, I call it my bag of tricks, we're pretty low tech in this cemetery, but geography works. Not geography, geometry. And we have stakes in the cemetery where I string a line east to west, north to south, measure, every plot is 2 by 2, and with some help from the likes of Mike Boris and Rita and Clay Ewell, we find the right spot, I think. It is my privilege and honor to manage this cemetery, and especially to help families lay their loved ones to rest, or find the place where they know that they are going to be laid to rest, to take that burden off their family. And after we do an interment, our property manager opens the plot, and after the interment is completed, we ask the family to fill it in as well as they can. And it is a very special time for family and for those of us who are attending those interments. So now to Queenie's script. So once again, welcome everybody on behalf of Mike, Christy, the Captiva Island Historic Society, and the Captiva Chapel by the Sea, just down the way. If you haven't ever visited there, today is a good opportunity. The door is open and the lights on in there for a little while longer, thanks to our resident minister, Doug Dortch. And thank you for allowing us the opportunity to share aspects of the of the cemetery, both past, present, and future. I am vice president of the Captiva Chapel by the Sea. I've been chair of our cemetery committee for about 14 years, and the cemetery and the chapel are very closely linked. And that is primarily because in the early days of the chapel, it was owned by the Methodist Church. And in about 1932, Mrs. Brainerd deeded the cemetery to the chapel by the sea, and it has been managed by the chapel ever since. Some years of neglect, I'm sorry to say, when the chapel wasn't actually operating as a chapel, but it has been well cared for lovingly for at least about 70 years. So given Captiva's Barrier Island location, it is pretty amazing to think that our cemetery is a space that has survived devastating acts of Mother Nature, including hurricanes, tropical cyclones, and of course storm surge that we experienced just last year. Several years ago, members of the Chapel Cemetery Committee participated in a training that was put on by the Florida Public Archaeology Network, which is in conjunction with the Florida Division of Historic Resources. And it was this instruction that gave us the background for how to control the cemetery, how to how to clean it up after the ruin that was caused by Hurricane Charlie and also Hurricane Ian. And just about a year ago, there were a couple dozen volunteers on a Saturday working in the cemetery to clean the stones according to the direction that we had received from the Florida Archaeology Network, and also to make sure we could locate all of the stones, especially those in the historic part. And the historic part is the section that's closest to the beach. There were some places where there was 4 feet of sand. So I do have a map with the location of the historic stones or historic graves, and so we were literally poking in the sand to find the location, and I'm happy to say we found all of them, of which there's about 75 in the historic part. This closer part of the cemetery to the gate, there was very little damage. We had to take out one tree that had uprooted a stone, and of course there were a lot of trees down, but otherwise our little cemetery survived all that water and wind and rain really pretty well. But it's not only acts of nature that can bring some chaos to this peaceful place. Over the years, there have been some thoughtless acts of mankind. One of the most recent was geocaching. You kind of know what that is? And we had people in here that whoever does the geocache, the clues directed them to different places inside the cemetery, and we had to get a hold of the geocaching. Somebody in Kentucky I had to talk to say, will you please take the Captiva Cemetery off your list? We just can't have people. It's disrespectful. It's important to remember that a cemetery is a place of respect. So we put a stop to that one. And occasionally we've had some vandalism. But for the most part, this space is respected and enjoyed by all creatures. So when you have an opportunity, I recommend you take some time, go into the cemetery, sit on a bench, be quiet for a minute. You may be visited by a flock of ibis, or in the late spring or early spring, a good old Chuck Will's widow that's known to have kept some of us up at night now and then. So the cemetery is approximately 2 acres in size, and given the limited amount of space, we now have a memorial wall there so that people whose remains are interred somewhere other than here can be remembered on Captiva with their name and birth year and death year. To purchase a plot or a place on the memorial wall, one must have a Captiva connection, have been or are a resident, or have a connection to the chapel by the sea. And yes, we do recognize the cemetery as a treasured gift. And now, this is more important than ever, cemeteries are among the most under-recorded historic resources in Florida. Currently, there's a Florida Department of State master file with more than 237,000 cultural and historic sites recorded, 2 of which are the cemetery and the chapel. But only about 1,700 of these sites are cemeteries. So the Captiva Chapel by the Sea chose to add our cemetery to the state's master file because inclusion on that list can help us protect these historical burial sites. Also, being on that master file helps to share with countless people from around the world the story of our island, its history, and our pioneer families. And the Captiva Cemetery is also on the list of National Historic Places that's managed by the U.S. Department of the Interior. And that happened just about 10 years ago. So surely little Anne Brainerd never imagined how many others would share her same thoughts when they visited this perfect place that she'd ever seen. And Clara Strand. I wonder what Captiva's own Gypsy Queen would think of the more than 200 reviews on TripAdvisor. So whether you're visiting from Sanibel or Sweden, you may want to add your name and hometown information to the visitor log that is on the front porch of the chapel. And now if Christy and Mike would join me back up here, we'd like to take any questions that you might have, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Thank you.
Questions? Pass.
Nancy, I was wondering how many plots we have left.
200. Mary Jane, what? Oh, sure. Pat asked how many plots we have remaining available in the Captiva Cemetery. And it is 200. Now, some of them are right up next to the fences. Some of them now have trees. But when it's completely full, we will have sold 200 from today. Jim?
You mentioned that the historic part of the cemetery had 75 grave sites.
Yes.
How many in total are they on the 2 acres?
So Jim asked, noted that I said there were 75 in the historic part. How many are there in the total cemetery? About 600, including the historic part. Did I say we only do cremains? The plots are 2 by 2. There are no more full body burials here, but there were.
Questions? Anybody else? Any story? Yeah.
Wendy?
Why are there randomly placed unmarked grave markers?
On some of those, why are there randomly, and I'm repeating the question, I'm not sure I have the answer. Why are there randomly placed markers? And there's a combination, there's a practice or advice that when historic markers are chipped or whatever, that you leave them where they are. Is that not correct?
That's right.
And some of the markers look like historic markers, and they're actually just perimeters, the concrete posts that are not actually cemetery markers at all, but they're just defining an area, which is very common. And I've noticed it in all old cemeteries, the same kind of a situation. So, what else do we have?
Sometimes they not only had a headstone, they had a footstone.
Other questions? Yes?
For those that are eligible to be buried here, what does it cost?
What is the cost to be buried here if you're eligible?
Our 2 by 2 plots are $1,500 each.
But it's beachfront property, so.
But it's very quiet.
Any other? No more taxes. Other questions? If no, yes. Yes,
Can you
Myrna.
tell us about the coins and the shells on the headstones?
It's a very common question. I have some. Can you tell us about the practice of putting shells and coins on headstones? And I was always interested in that, and my research said that the practice goes back to the Romans. Other people may have, and I think there are other people who have weighed in here. And the practice was really to allow whoever is there, whoever comes to visit again, know that you visited. This grave had been visited. Do you have anything else to add to that?
I also understand that it was a sign of respect when someone visited, that yes, that they were here, that they were mourned for, supported, perhaps prayed for. Just a sign of respect, I think.
Yes, Kevin.
Where is the memorial wall that you
It's over here. It's in the northwest corner.
okay.
All right, it's right there. It's getting filled up, isn't it? And when it does, we'll put up another stone. All right, I want to thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to have you here. And if you're not going to go all in at once, those of you who came far, please feel free to visit the cemetery now and any time in the future. Thank you for your interest, and God bless you all.